be talking about how we can understand experiences of extreme heat futures through an intersectional lens by examining the 2022 heatwave in Nottingham in the UK. And this was what I did on my incredibly short postdoc between my PhD and my faculty position. So I'd like to thank my collaborators Liz Cooper, Ada Hui, and Charles Ogunbode. So when we're thinking about extreme heat futures, we've had an ongoing conversation in the conference room today about whether to have the air conditioning on or off, whether it's too hot or too cold. And I think it's worth saying that in the context of a conference on the social psychology of the future, climate change is going to increase the likelihood of these kind of extreme heat events in the long term, including heat waves and droughts. So when we think about a heat wave, it's a period of abnormally high temperatures that will persist for 3 to 5 consecutive days or more. That's abnormally high according to the country that we're in. So in the UK, if we have a heat wave, it might be something like 35 degrees, whereas somewhere like India or Vietnam might actually reach even like 40, 45. That might be considered a heat wave over there. And these events stand to become much more commonplace as we move further into the climate crisis. And if we don't act against the climate crisis now, they're going to become increasingly common for future generations as well. So this is something we should be thinking about. But at the moment, we're kind of thinking about heat waves in a very limited sense. So when you look up the heat wave literature, we're thinking of heat wave impacts as primarily regarded in sort of physical health terms. And we'll often see people talk about the amount of excess deaths that are caused in terms of heat waves. And this is obviously incredibly reductionist because very few people die in these events, but everyone has some kind of experience of heat waves. So the approach minimizes the complexity. Heat waves also have really huge impacts for work and leisure, caregiving relationships, social relationships, and mental health as well. And also, the thing that I'm most interested in is how climate justice interacts with extreme heat experiences. So we know that climate change is likely to impact those who are already most disadvantaged within society, and we believe that heat wave vulnerability may also vary according to demographic and occupational identity as well. So just to give a few examples from the literature here. So people who live in densely populated urban areas are less likely to have easy access to green spaces for fresh air, which could also increase the heat of the area. Those living in poorly ventilated dwellings, top floor flats, and overcrowded homes are also more likely to suffer negative health impacts from excessive heat. And low-income earners may be unable to pay for energy to sufficiently cool their homes. So in the UK, it's common that if you're a really low-income earner, you actually have an energy prepayment meter, which means that these people actually pay more per unit of energy. So then if you're using more energy to try and cool your house, but you're already disadvantaged because you're on a prepayment meter, it's just, a bit of a mess and really disadvantaging and not very good. So, we took all of these problems and we wanted to kind of explore how heat wave vulnerability might differ according to different demographic and occupational groups. So in collaboration with Nottingham City Council, we did 45 interviews. 25 were with members of the public, but 20 of those were also with emergency services staff. So this included community-based health and social care workers, healthcare workers, some emergency responders like A&E, fire and rescue, and some police people as well. So to analyse this, we did a reflexive thematic analysis adopting a realist epistemology, so the idea that what our participants were telling us was their version of the truth and we should take that at face value. And this is very much still in progress. So we were still collecting this data, I think, in February. We've only just kind of collated everything together and put it all together. So these are just some very preliminary themes that we'd love some feedback on in general. So just to give you an idea of the demographics, obviously because we were interested in intersecting identities, we have quite a diverse sample that was kind of stratified, and we had to work with someone who helped us gain access to these kind of groups. So we have a variety of, I think we have about equal gender, a variety of amounts of education. So we had some people who had only gone to secondary school and some people who had like PhDs, a variety of employment as well, and a variety of ethnicities as well. And it's worth saying here that the reason we chose Nottingham as a context is that it's been kind of defined as one of the places in the UK that's most vulnerable to heatwave impacts, in large part due to its demographic makeup and the sort of amount of tarmac, I guess, they have. That's simplifying things, but yeah. So, to go through just the process of coding, I wanted to give you a visualization of where we're at the moment before I go into some of the preliminary themes. So we identified a number of different overarching codes which are over here. So we looked at what people reported as the positive impacts of the heat wave, what were the negative impacts of the heat wave, whether they attributed the heat wave to climate change, how they talked about carbon neutral Nottingham 28, and how they spoke about adaptation and coping and their attitudes towards heat waves in general. This here is sort of a diagram of the amount of codes per sort of, overarching codes. And what you can see here is that primarily most people were talking about how they coped and how they adapted to the heat wave. And also, even though positive impacts are showing up here as a distinct category, positive impacts are actually only way down there. So people didn't really talk that much about the positive impacts, and even when they did, they talked more about the negative impacts as well. So, I had to kind of pick and choose what to present here because this is very, very preliminary. So I'm going to present sort of 4 initial themes that we're thinking about, with the huge caveat that we're very much still working on this. So the first theme is looking at, I didn't cope well, but I lived to tell the tale, which is great. The second theme is planning for while contributing to a climate change future. Then we have business as usual, and then we have heat waves at the intersection. So for I didn't cope well, but I lived to tell the tale, this was about the way that people describe their experiences of heat waves, and we found that people did tend to struggle, but these struggles were really counterbalanced with stories of solidarity and resilience, people coming together and helping each other. We also found that people spoke about the mental health impact, how tired they were, how frustrated they got, that kind of thing. And also, interestingly, from a methodological perspective, people really needed reminding of the experience. So we did these interviews about 6 months after the heat wave, and people would kind of start the interviews going, oh yeah, I coped really well actually, it was fine. And then as soon as we started prompting them, we found that they were just increasingly going, oh yeah, but my mum went into hospital and I didn't know what to do with my dog and I thought I was going to die. And you're like, whoa, okay, this is not what you were saying 10 minutes ago. So there was very much some contradictions about how good or how bad it was. So a couple of quotes here. I think I coped really well. Like I said, I do like heat, but for me, I enjoyed the warmth, but it's different when you've got to go to work in it, and it's not just a leisure experience. So it's kind of like, well, did you like it? Did you not? These were the kind of stories that we would get from people. And the smaller quote down here, anyway, it worked okay for me. I was saying my bigger concern was about the park. So when we're talking about mental health impacts, we also talk about climate anxiety. Fundamentally, that was it was really, for me, really brought it home. When Vernon Park looks like the Serengeti, something's wrong at that point. So people were really connecting it to climate anxiety and climate change. The next theme was on business as usual, and I think this is the most interesting thing. I'm in a school of management now, and I think what's really interesting about this theme is that when we talk about the climate emergency, we don't often emphasize the emergency in that part of it, and these events are really extreme and they're really difficult, but people kind of just try to do business as usual throughout them. They try to maintain normal expectations of productivity, and that can be really difficult and very damaging. So this person at the top over here says it was just the tiredness, the general fact that you said you expected to carry on as much as normal. And then also this bigger quote here was someone talking about, this was a policeman in a professional interview. So he was saying, I don't really know what you could have done. We still got to police, we still got to look after people. It doesn't just, it's extremely difficult and we appreciate your efforts. They get encouragement in terms of actual physical adaptation. They still had to go out and police. Crime doesn't go away because it's hot, right? And sometimes the policies that were designed to kind of protect people, such as the instance of Stabfest in the police example, or fire gear in the firefighter example, actually became pretty harmful or difficult to manage because there was very little flexibility there. And few employers had any plan for heatwave operations. Everyone just kind of going, oh, we couldn't anticipate this, we just kind of tried our best, and it's not really good enough, honestly. So that was great. Heat waves at the intersection, so we're still looking at how heat waves are experienced by different demographic groups. Interestingly, that's kind of complicated by the necessity to anonymize aspects of the qualitative data that kind of we need to kind of rematch in a very sensitive way. So we're still working on this. But we know from the data that we have that the heat wave impacted different groups of people differently. And I think the most interesting one to me was 0 hours workers. So this quote here, it was exhausting, nothing was open, it felt really strange. We had one day where we didn't go in because it was too hot. The manager said, don't come in. And then the excellent interview here kind of probes, out of interest, just very quickly, that day when your boss told you not to come in, did you get paid? No. I'm on a 0 hours contract. And there were lots of experiences like this where the kind of health and safety policies designed to protect people would also undermine people who are really disadvantaged within society. There was also various other experiences, but I don't think I have much time left, so I'm going to move on. And then in terms of the final theme that I wanted to talk about today, I feel like this is very prevalent. So in the room, it's quite warm. We've been kind of toiling between turning the air conditioning on, turning it off. And I think a lot of our participants felt this kind of tension as well. So the final theme is planning for while contributing to a climate change future. So lots of people wanted air conditioning or had plans to get it. People spoke about getting fans. And also people actually in the UK spoke about spending a lot of time in their cars because the car was the only place that they had air conditioning. So it's like the heat wave is happening because climate change is happening because of cars. And then, yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, this is, this is very difficult to unpack. And the air conditioning didn't even always work. So in circumstances where people already had it, sometimes it would just pack in and not actually make a difference at all. So the main point here is we should consider how these mitigation strategies also contribute to the problem and try and find low carbon ways for people to keep cool that are more intuitive. So another thing that came up was people talking about DIY strategies for avoiding the heat. But sometimes they would get these strategies from TikTok, and one participant talked about putting tinfoil on the window and then the window like shattering. So yeah, we really need trusted communicators to go and tell people how they can avoid the heat. And there was also a general concern about the cost of living crisis, people wanting to stay cool, wanting to have their fans on, but also really struggling with the cost of that or being anxious about the cost of that on their bills. So that was another part of it. So, kind of to conclude, unfortunately, extreme heat futures are on the way, and we are vastly underprepared. This is just speaking in a UK context, but I'm pretty sure this is globally. I've lived in places like Arizona, where I know people only live there because there is air conditioning, and we need to make sure that there are other ways of adapting to heat that isn't just getting more air conditioning, unfortunately. The lack of preparation is particularly damaging to people who are already marginalised or low income, and definitely increases their vulnerability. In this project, we've also done some quantitative analysis. That analysis is proving a little bit more difficult, so I haven't presented it today, but we're hoping to also publish that at some point. And people are really resilient, particularly in the UK. There's a kind of sense of stiff upper lip, like everyone kind of gets on with it. But because of this, they misremember the intensity of the heat wave impacts. And methodologically, that's why it's really important, I think, to engage in qualitative work where you really hear someone's story, get to the bottom of it, and think about what trauma they might be or might not be solving. But yeah, that's me.